Let's welcome up Stefan, from Creative Director of Secret Location, Laura, Senior Manager, Brand and Communications at Cineplex. We've got Anna, Chief Digital Officer, Managing Director at IDEABOOST. And last but not least, we've got Keram, Founder and Executive Director of VRTO and FIVARS Festival. Let's give them a warm welcome.
How are you?
Excellent.
Okay.
Great.
So we're going to talk now and kind of shift gears, talking about VR content, via VR marketing and media experiences. But I kind of wanted to first start just with this question, and it can just be very short, yes or no. But I'm going to ask, we've had a really big year for VR. Is VR here? People say 2016 is the year of VR. I mean, they're actually still saying 2016 is the year of mobile, which is kind of funny. But because it's like every year is the year of mobile. But is VR here? Is it here?
I would say yes.
Okay.
I think that VR is at the starting blocks, and the race is about to begin.
Okay.
I agree. I'd say 2015 is the year that VR has just started to arrive. Oh, sorry, 2016.
Okay. Yeah.
2017 definitely will be the year of disruption.
Okay.
So if getting ready, putting on your makeup, getting your hair done, buying those shoes, etc., is about being here, then VR is here.
Okay.
But the prom ain't this year.
That's so awesome.
I think it's so here that we are not going to escape it. And if it's this far in the conversation and we are all just dripping in the conversation of what it is, we know how technology goes. Mm-hmm. It's all verbs. It's all going to be forward. There's nothing you can do to stop it, right, Anna? So
no.
Why are we even pretending like it's not here? Of course it's here.
Okay. You heard it here. So so thinking about 2017, we're saying, we're just putting our makeup on. What are some of the ingredients that are missing that need to be in play in order for VR to accelerate, not to be here, but to accelerate and be adopted? What would you guys say are some of the missing ingredients? What's the one thing that keeps you up at night?
I would say there's three.
Okay.
One is just trial. People are still trying to understand what virtual reality is. I mean, it's been in the news, a lot of people are speaking about it, but not everybody gets yet what true virtual reality is. And I'd say second is just the overall value equation, just to make sure that people are actually adopting it and bringing it home. Technology is still quite expensive for at-home VR, and there is content. For example, Steam has over 600 games. But there's still not as much content as you would have when it comes to linear TV or YouTube content, where you're able to burn through new content for an hour every day. So I'd say those are the three things that are holding it.
Well, we need Cineplex to start creating VR arcades and theaters. So I think that's one of the core, sorry to put you on the spot like that. I think that's one of the core ingredients that's missing, is that if the only place where you can see VR is in industry-based conferences, and then you can maybe buy stuff in Best Buy here or there, but there's no real kind of spaces other than the Waterloo Arcade and the one that's about to come up in Toronto soon, I forgot the name of the virtual arcade, coming, then I think that's a core ingredient that's missing.
PlayStation VR is coming out in 2 weeks, and Google announced Daydream today.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say. Actually, Anna, it's really interesting that you talk about the offline opportunity with VR. I think there's a lot of focus on mobile VR and being accessible to consumers from a price point, and HTC and Oculus and PSVR being the game console 2.0. But being again in China, I had the fortunate opportunity of seeing what's happening with the offline world, and they're really putting emphasis as part of their overall strategy, especially for content developers, on accessing the new wave of internet cafes that are turning over and becoming VR cafes, or just net new VR experience centers that are popping up, and it's definitely catching fire in China. And already in the States, we're seeing things like the Void and Control V and Waterloo popping up as well. So hopefully we'll see more of that.
I mean, that's a critical part of the first phase, because it's monetizable content. So these kinds of theme parks / pods / theaters, you have to buy a ticket. And so, and that's why festivals do so well, don't they, Keram? And
they
Tom,
sure do, Hannah.
because you purchase a ticket, that's how you're paying for those content licenses potentially. And I think we'll see a lot more of that grow in North America in similar ways that it has in China.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say, like, running a festival in VR is really weird because we don't know how long the certain scarcity models that things like this actually can, they'll change. But I guess the point that I want to make over and over again is that this is going to evolve into an unrecognizable thing within 5 years. And everything that we say right now, which is totally worth saying, is going to be obsolete completely, right? And it's going to like merge, and things are going to come together into other things. So all we can do is kind of traipse forward right now. And my agenda is to put as much art and soul and experimentation into it as long as we possibly can before things start to pretend like they're coalescing into something. We've all decided that now this is what it's going to be like. So we have to kick it and kick it and kick it, not be worried that it's going to go away. Now, having said that, I also feel like there's this incredibly important thing about not splintering out and fighting with each other and competing with each other, because, and that happens when people get a little cocky, I'm a very community-driven guy in this whole VR racket, and a couple of weeks ago when it was a lot of bad press and Palmer Luckey was being an idiot and, things were happening that were not good, I thought, what if this was to sort of go away? Like, what if this was to cool off? And I was really, really sad because we've come a long, long way, and what we have in front of us is beautiful. But then I realized I was being an idiot. It's not going to go away. You can't put this thing back in the bottle. I don't know who's read a book called The Inevitable here, but I totally recommend you read that book. It's about the unstoppable process and the ways in which technology will move forward. Not which tech, not whether it's VR versus AR, or whether it's cinemas versus mobile devices, but just the way in which those things are going to move forward. And that you have to align yourself with the energy of each of those things, whether it's remixability or accessibility or whatever those things, becoming, or the different forms that these forces kind of rise up and change and mutate. And we have to let go of that idea of ownership, and we have to let go of that idea of control, and just put ourselves in the flow. I mean, not to sound like a giant hippie here, but put ourselves in the flow of these things, and then we will work with them, right? Because they're eventually going to run us. Like, we're handing it all over. So we better learn to play nicely with our new technical, mechanical overlords, and stop acting like we're going to go back to some safe little internet world or something.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the festival experience, the artist, the changing role of the actor. And all of you have experience in touching on storytelling in some way. And so tell me how VR is already changing these areas. It's changing art and the art of film or the actor itself. Tell me some stories, friends.
Yeah, so I can talk a bit about that because we just launched a hybrid VR broadcast series in foreign markets called Halcyon. But the experience was really interesting on the VR side because it sort of speaks to two of my big passions, which are improv theater and Dungeons and Dragons. Because in my opinion, virtual reality is a lot less like being streamed content from a screen to your face, and a lot more about being a willing participant in that story, in that world. Right now, VR is, well, to me, there's something missing. There's that sense of touch, that sense of agency that's not there. We're getting there. I think that we've seen the first steps. People are really interested in picking things up in the world and manipulating objects, but I think when we start to connect with those objects, connect with the other people, and also be able to feel them, that's when the mediums are really going to start to, hit overdrive.
Oh, so it's interesting because in terms of art, we're about to launch a VR creative doc lab with the NFB and the Ford Foundation for diverse creators next week. And so part of my job was to kind of And this is to open up the VR documentary space to all sorts of points of views and to creators who may not have had access to the technology, but should certainly be part of the conversation. And so as we were putting together the reading list of what they should read prior to the lab, the one thing that I sent as part of the list is actually Char Davies's writings on her 1995 VR work, Osmos. Now, Char Davies is a Canadian artist that actually has created, I think, one of the most incredible VR works, where you control your experience through your breath. And the 3D environments that she created are these gorgeous spaces. And so from an art perspective, the one kind of takeaway I had in designing this kind of program with my colleagues is we actually need to recapture old VR art and bring it back to how we think about new VR art, because there's a lot of gold there.
Yeah, we totally are on the same page about that, because there's so much that we can learn from the 20, 30, 40, 50 years that got us to this, right? And I think this is also a paradigm, a very specific. When we talk about VR now, we're not talking about VR 2000 or VR 1990. This is a thing, and we should also look at this thing for what it is, because 10 years from now, we'll say, remember that thing where we all had mobile phones taped to our faces, and we were doing 360 storytelling, and then IMAX and Starbreeze got into that thing. But cave environments were incredible, and cave environments are going to come back, and there's this huge bank of knowledge that happened at Banff Media Center, right in Canada, like some of the best people in the business, all women too.
Yeah, absolutely. Jackie Mori wrote a PhD thesis on how the 100 seminal VR pieces that were created in the 90s were all made by women.
Just saying. But so that is also something we should turn back and look at the textbooks that came before us and say, what cool things we're doing. And now imagine what we could do with this tech nowadays. So FIVARS does a thing where we have a festival that's dedicated to very narrow filters, because instead of that being sort of closed-minded, it actually forces creativity, I feel, like, there's constraints. Tell me a story with an apple and a pear and a peach, and that's all you get, right? So, but we also look for unique mechanics, and each piece has got to introduce something that the others haven't. And as each year goes on, that gets harder. Oh my God, what else could we do? But I love that. I love that test. And on top of it, it has to be narrative.
Right.
But it creates that conversation of what narrative actually is, and has nothing to do with film, and we say that kind of stuff. But
Right. Laura, any thoughts?
I would say what I love about VR and just regular films that would be in festivals is they're such perfect complements. When you look at more linear storytelling, you're appealing or you're developing a story for a viewer. And virtual reality, of course, you're developing a world for a visitor. And that visitor may have a different story each time they view that story, and their friends may have a different experience as well. What I love about VR as well is, even for short experiences, what you can't get in a linear story is a little bit more intimate with the characters that are in those films. So for example, even just a simple experience where you're in the same room as a character, let's say in their bedroom, and you're able to look at the notes that they've written for themselves as they're exploring their room. Nothing to do with the story, but you become a little bit more connected to them. You look at the books that they've read in the past, and again, you become a little bit more connected to them. Right. So when you go back and you watch the story, whether it's through TV or through film, you feel a little bit more immersed in that story.
Actually, there's a fantastic VR 360 film that has a ton of cuts in it called Knives, which Keram curated at the conference, VRTO conference this summer. And there's an incredible scene where it's kind of this thriller-esque type short film where one of the protagonists opens up a piece of paper, but your point of view is watching them open the paper, and you're desperate to find out what the hell is written in that piece of paper, and then the point of view shifts, and you're that person reading. And I thought that was one of the most transformative things I've experienced in film in a long time.
I was in the New York Media Lab last month, and they were trying to recreate Hamlet. It was Hamlet. Yes, it was Hamlet, and it was a scene where Hamlet's talking to a ghost, and they were able to change my perspective on where I was. Was I behind Hamlet? Was I behind the ghost? But even more importantly, they were able to make the ghost big or small. And it was the same scene, but I was experiencing that scene very viscerally, like 15 different ways. And it's something that I would never have been able to do on 2D video or even live, to be quite honest. And so I think there's something to be said there for sure.
And I'm not going to be picky about calling 360 VR or not calling it VR. We'll just say it is for the sake of this argument. But look at what's happening with Tilt Brush. And again, this idea of like emergent things that take place over time, this procedural sort of generated reality that we have. Tilt Brush was it was MS Paint for VR for a while. And now you've got multi-user, you've got a portal brush, it's like you're building game mechanics inside of your own painting, and now people are going completely crazy and building whole worlds, like dioramas that you can just like walk into, and it's one art style, and then just back out of that person's painting into another world. And this one's black and white and illustrative, and the other one's, what is that? Like, it is something completely new that's emerging in front of our faces this week on Twitter.
But let's go there a little bit with VR 360 content. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know that there are a lot of discussions that are happening in the VR community around wanting to make sure that there is a distinction, because people walk away from a VR 360 experience thinking that's VR, but they haven't tasted another flavor of VR. So they feel like that's it. They've kind of checked that mark, and they may not pick up an HTC Vive because they said they've done it on Google Cardboard, for example. Thoughts on that?
So I'll go back to nearly a year ago on this stage at your West conference, James Jensen from Void. There's a quote that will always stay with me. For the Void experience, for those of you who don't know, that's where you're actually able to roam around with a backtop, and you have a haptic vest, and you're able to lift up real-world objects. There's environmental effects. And how he described the Void experience is every step that you take into the Void should convince you that you're actually there. And to me, that's ultimate VR. But on the flip side, I'd also say that I've experienced some incredible 360 experiences, and they're incredible because you don't actually need to step in those experiences. They're developed for the viewer to actually be seated. So whether you're sitting alongside somebody in a car, or you're on stage in Cirque du Soleil, which I absolutely loved, the way that they use sound and eye contact with the characters and movement on stage, it still made me feel present. So I would feel that the right filmmaking can make 360 VR.
Oh yeah, we can go beyond that. Even like immersion can be done with almost any media. I get immersed in the books that I read. I get immersed in the television shows that I watch. I forget that I'm sitting on the couch and I get immersed into that program. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but where do theme park rides sit? Like the Haunted Mansion at Disney, is that a virtual reality because I'm being transported to some place that's not a theme park anymore? So I think that there's layers of depth, and 360 video like on a screen is maybe like a very shallow version of VR, whereas the room scale sort of Void experience is like the very deep Marianas Trench version of VR.
Do you remember, I don't know which study said this, but they were doing a study of Gear VR buyers, and they said something like, I'm going to get the stats wrong. If anyone knows, please tell me. The thing that they loved to do the most was to just watch Netflix on their head-mounted displays. I forget which study that was, but basically...
Was it a Netflix study?
It wasn't a Netflix study. It wasn't.
Okay.
It really wasn't. But I think, to be totally sort of blunt about it and kind of like cheesy, not cheesy, but like reductive, I think sometimes when you just want to escape, there's something to be said for just like going under the covers, and it's kind of similar to going under the covers with your flashlight, reading a book that's in your tent. It's sort of that type of experience that I think that particular result of that study points to. So I wonder whether there's something primal about just being so alone in your own fictional world that makes 360 films palatable.
Well, and I think like Flickr photos for me are one of those moments where I get 360 content, where I want to be in a moment that's static. I want to be in this picture that someone shot, but actually feel like I'm immersed by it. And I've sat in, starry skies and deserts and had like a sense of, spiritual peace in some of those moments, where it didn't need to be an actual 3D environment. It just needed to basically consume me more than it would if I looked at it online.
We can improve the tech on that, because I hate that I want to be in a beautiful 3D spherical experience, or 360 one, and then it doesn't center. Like, I have to watch Netflix pointing forward, and I can't lay on my back yet and watch it. So that's just a stupid, like, drop the ball kind of thing that's got to get fixed. So anybody who wants to make that tech, fix it. But also, the other thing from an authoring standpoint is, one is passive. When you're creating the stuff, am I designing for a passive experience? Let's just say, let's not be super specific. Passive in the sense that I'm going to sit here and it's going to happen at me and around me, versus a reactive one where you have to, So that's the distinction, really. 360 just means, generally, besides being your own editor or whatever.
And so with every medium, we always go into it thinking that the past mediums are going to be erased. So how do you see VR, and even those two flavors of VR, impacting film and television and online video?
There's a study, and they found... No,
It's by Netflix? Do you know what I mean? Like right now, we're seeing a lot of the VR content as add-ons, right? So we're like, for example, Ghostbusters with The Void is a great example, where I could see going to the movie, and then I have a 10-minute experience where I experience being in a scene of Ghostbusters. We haven't yet really seen a lot of examples, perhaps except for maybe something like what you've done, where it's tried to be all on its own. Is that just because the tech's not there? Is it because this is the type of way that the experience is going to be? Talk to me about what's going on here.
All right, so very quickly, so Halcyon is like a first step into that sort of environment. So we're very aware that we're not 100% there yet, and we wanted to take that step and start moving that direction. But I mean, I don't think that VR is going to take anything away from TV or film. I think those are their own mediums, and if anyone has seen the new HBO show Westworld, and if you haven't, you should. But that's kind of where I think that the content in VR is going. It's going to be different. We're not going to have protagonists because we're going to be the protagonists. So the stories have to change. And one of the things I love about that show is they go into the sort of corporate side, or the creator side, so the studio that's making the content, and they have their discussions about story loops and stuff. And I'm like, this is it. That's VR storytelling. It might be robots in the show, but for us, it's going to be virtual.
I'm not worried about TV going away, because I would go to NAB, and every year they would talk about cable cutting and asynchronous viewing and binge watching and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that I use TV because I want to passively lay on the couch and have someone program for me for as long as it takes me to get my ass back up off the couch. And that might be 3 weeks and a lot of Haagen-Dazs or whatever, right? So TV is this thing that's much more than just a medium that is just a flat, now that's just flat and in a frame. It's got way more cultural and societal sort of attachments to it, as VR will as well. And each of these things is going to have a whole grammar that emerges with it. Radio is the same. Radio still has a reason to be there. Even ads in radio have a reason to still be there.
It's just like how we have cell phones that we can do video calls with. And if you went back into the 90s and told me in the future you're going to have those, I'm going to be like, I'm going to be using that all the time. That's the only way I will make phone calls. But I prefer to text more than anything. It's technology we've had forever. Why? Because there's a reason to use it. It has its uses. And Keram, I totally agree with you. I think that TV, film, they're here to stay. That passive experience is something I want. I want to sit there and be authored something. I want to be an audience.
I mean, the biggest thing around the relationship between TV and VR is, unfortunately, right now, that's really the only way we can pay for VR, is as an extension of some kind of IP property that's on another medium, and marketing budgets end up paying for it, right? So the big ass question is, will people pay for VR as standalone experiences? And will they pay for those that aren't games? Will they pay for VR docs? Will they pay for VR news? I mean, it's hard enough to fund news. Are they going to end up paying extra for VR news?
They will,
We don't
Anna.
know. Yeah. I hope so.
Right now on Steam, so the story was 2 weeks ago that Steam sales, everybody knows what Steam is. I imagine everybody here. So, right. So they had flatlined. There was no growth. VR is dead. And now they're talking about how it's a third of Steam sales, and that the top, there's like top 30% of Steam games are mostly VR. And what I'm buying on Steam, and I'm buying stuff on Steam, I could go out as the editor of Indie Game Reviewer and ask for any code for anything I want anytime, but I need this right now, and it's because I can go to Mars and I can do an educational sort of retreat. I just go out, and it's not a game and it's not a story, but I can just kind of sit on Mars, and I can kind of just look at details like we were talking about with the notes and stuff, and I can educate myself in this interesting way. I can kind of upgrade myself in a passive, solitary, contemplative thing, and I'll pay for that all the time.
And I would also add, so Anna mentioned IPs, which are so important. If you look at what Disney does, they just continue to add to their ecosystem when they have a different franchise. So if they're basically in the business of selling merch. That's where a lot of their revenue comes from. But they have film to support that. They have the TV spinoff. They have Radio Disney. They have so many different platforms, and virtual reality is another. It's so different from all of those, so it complements what's out there.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to let you guys head out and experience some of that virtual reality. Big round of applause for our panelists up here on stage. Thank you very much, everybody.